Okay, another thing about percentages that comes up quite often is what happens with a price increase followed by a price decrease, and investigate. The easiest way to investigate this is if you actually take a real number. So let's say that we've got a book and it's going to cost 100 kronas, and we're going to increase that price by 10%. So if we're going to increase the price by 10%, we need 100 kronas multiplied by 1.1. This is the factor change. Here's our original 100 kronas, and we want an extra 10% that's equivalent to the decimal 0.1. So we could get this directly using factor change, or change factor. This will give us a new price of 110 kronas. Factor change is quite useful. Another way of doing it is thinking that you've got your original 100 kronas plus 10% of 100 kronas, which is 10 kronas. So you get 100 plus 10% of 100, which would be 100 plus 10, giving you 110 kronas. So after a 10% increase, we would have a new price of 110. And now we're going to decrease it by 10%. So now we have, if we're going to decrease something by 10%, that means that we'd actually be paying 90%. So step 1 was increase by 10%. Step 2 is decrease by 10%. The thing is, we don't have 100 kronas anymore. Our book now costs 110. So we want to know what is 90%, which is a 0.9 factor change. We want to pay 90% of the book price, 110 kronas. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we can just multiply. 110 times 0.9 is the same as 11 times 9. Move the decimal point this way, that one, and so we get 110 times 0.9 is the same as 11 nines, which is 99. Another way of doing it is to think that, okay, if 100% is equivalent to 110 kronas, then 10% must be equivalent to 11 kronas. And if we want to know what the new price is after we've taken off 10%, we can do 110 minus 11, which would give us 99 kronas. So there's different ways of using this. You get actually more points if you use the factor change method, multiplying directly by 0.9. But we notice we don't get back to the original price of the book. So first an increase of 10% followed by a decrease of 10% doesn't give us the original book price. The book is more expensive now, so when we take off 10%, we're going to be taking off more than the 10 kronas we increased previously. We're actually taking off 11 kronas now. And once you practice this a few times with numbers, you can actually think of what would we do if it was the letter P instead then. So we don't actually have a price here. We're increasing a price P by 10%, follow it by a price P. So after the first change, an increase of 10%, we would have 1.1 times P. We're increasing P with 10%, it will give us 1.1P. And now we're doing, so that was an increase of 10%. Notice I'm doing an arrow here for increase. A decrease then of 10% in the second change will be that instead of adding 10% like I did here with the 1.1, I'm actually going back to a decrease of 10%. So I want 90% of my new price, which is 1.1p. Okay, and it's important to notice here, my new price is 1.1. So what do we get then? We get 0.9 times 1.1, so we get 0.99 of p. So here we can keep it in terms of algebra. If I'm starting with a price p, I increase with 10%, I decrease with 10%, I don't get back to the original p, I get 0.99 of p. So that's what happens with percentage changes.